Hello folks, and welcome back to Internet Horror. I am the man behind the mic, Ron. Yeah, super creepy name, I know, right? So ever since my voice changed at about 12 or 13 years old, I've been told that I had a voice for radio. But being a very lazy and unmotivated young man, I did not go to college and I did not pursue a degree in broadcast media, which is where one would naturally go would they want to get themselves on radio. Here I sit in 2017 in the golden resurgence of podcasting and audio media, and I think to myself, fuck it, why not? Let's finally do something about it. So I had a digital Blue Spark microphone sitting in my garage for about 5-6 years now. I had originally bought it just to have a nice mic for gaming. So I break it out, kick the dust off of it, plug it in, and I start watching videos that were produced by Mike Delgadio of Nosleep fame. I'm going to put a link to his channel in the description and in the end credits. Amazing, amazing guy. He's got a voice like warm honey. Far, far smoother than my own. So, having watched his videos, it gave me a sense of unearned confidence because, honestly, my equipment and my setup is trash. I've got a decent digital audio workstation, which is Audition. And the microphone is okay, but I have no recording room to speak of, which is probably why you're getting that horrible background noise. I'm going to look to fix that in the future. But basically all of this is to tell you, the listener, that I'm very new to this. I'm still learning. I apologize if the audio quality isn't up to what you're used to, but I am working on it, and I'm going to try to keep getting better in the future. That being said, I have narrated a new tale today, which just came out from Reddit's Nosleep subreddit, from the mind of OddOldThrowaway. The title is, I Begged My Wife Not to Have a Home Birth. I hope you enjoy. I begged my wife not to have a home birth. She insisted on a midwife. She wanted to have the baby in the water, more natural, more relaxing for the child, she insisted. Won't the baby drown if it comes out in the water? My wife laughed at me and informed me that infants have a natural instinct to hold their breath. Okay, but what if ours doesn't? My wife just shook her head at me and told me that she thought this through and knew she was making the right decision. I didn't want to stress her out while she was pregnant. We had already suffered 2 miscarriages, and I knew if that happened again it might destroy her. So I just agreed to do what she wanted. When the big day came, my wife was nude and lying in a birth pool. That thing cost me over $400, but it was worth it to make her happy. The midwife herself had a really striking appearance. She wore her jet black hair in 2 braids that hung almost down to her knees. Her skin was a deep olive. Her almond-shaped eyes with long, thick lashes would have been beautiful but for the fact her pupils seemed unnaturally large, as if they were permanently dilated. She also wore dark plum lipstick and long red nails, filed sharply like talons. I couldn't tell if they were hers or if they were the fake ones women get at the salon. I remembered thinking it odd that a midwife would have nails like that. I vaguely worried what would happen if she accidentally cut the baby or my wife's, area? I have a demanding work schedule, so I am ashamed to say that the first time I had ever met the midwife was on the day my daughter was born. She and my wife clearly had developed a close friendship, though. I almost felt like a third wheel the entire time. She seemed to communicate with only glances, subtle gestures, and smiles. I was glad that my wife seemed comfortable, though. That was all that mattered, really. The birth itself was pleasantly uneventful. My wife only had to push 3 times before my daughter was out. I had expected lots of screaming, crying, cursing, like you see on TV. But my wife just squatted, furrowed her brows, did some quick shallow breathing, and it was over. Despite my concerns, it was mesmerizing to watch. After the midwife plugged the baby out of the murky wine-colored water, I kissed my wife's damp forehead and quietly thanked her for the gift she had given me. Finally, after the midwife had wiped my baby down with a damp cloth and swaddled her, my little girl was finally in my arms. I know every father believes his baby is perfect, and I was no different. She was perfect. Pure. I almost didn't notice when the midwife disappeared into the kitchen for a moment and returned with an empty glass. When she returned, she dunked the glass into the tub where my wife was still lying until it was about half full of blood, water, placenta, and possibly a bit of excrement. The woman then looked at me, eyes sparkling, and asked in a low voice if I would like to partake. I asked what she was talking about, and she told me to drink. That's when I asked the woman, in some somewhat colorful language, if she had lost her mind. My wife just smiled calmly and told me it's perfectly normal to consume after birth. It's even expected in many cultures. The midwife's eyes flickered and she handed the glass to my wife. With that, my wife downed the vile concoction in a few gulps. I could feel my lunch rising in my throat, so I averted my eyes. Instead, I looked down at my daughter. She was so beautiful that I almost didn't notice the midwife murmuring quietly. As I looked up, I saw her stroking my wife's hair and mumbling in what sounded like German, maybe? Or perhaps Greek. I couldn't be sure, but I was very relieved when the woman finally took her things and left. After that, it was just the three of us. The few days after the birth were a bit difficult for my wife. I've heard of pregnancy sickness, but not post-pregnancy vomiting. I joked with my wife that maybe if she hadn't gulped down her own bloody bath water, she wouldn't be feeling this way. Well, when I said that, she gave me a look I have never forgotten. It made my heart shudder and I felt chilly all over. I had earned a dirty look or 10 during the course of our relationship, don't get me wrong. But that look was almost inhuman. I could have sworn her normally soft green irises turned completely black for a moment. My wife began behaving oddly after that. Nothing too bizarre at first, but she would forget things. She'd be walking into the kitchen and then seem as if she didn't know where she was going. Once she left the bathtub running and almost flooded the entire house. She's always been attentive and alert, even during pregnancy, so it worried me a bit. But I heard my sister describe going through a period of what she called mom brain after having my niece and nephew. I figured that might be what it was. The one thing I can say about my wife is that she was a very attentive mother. Before my daughter would even cry, my wife would already have begun walking to her room with either a breast bared or a diaper in hand, never both. She seemed to sense what she needed. Still, I believed something was off. After one night in particular, I knew that this was more than mom brain. Have you ever woken up from your sleep because you felt someone might be watching you? It's an uneasy sensation. I know it happens all the time while people are awake, but for that feeling to permeate your consciousness is something different. You sort of get cold all over with a feeling that you're no longer safe in your bed. It was around 3 in the morning, I think, when I opened my eyes. I was in bed, but my wife was standing on it, looking down on me. I know it was just the angle, but she looked about 12 feet tall. It took me a moment for my eyes to adjust enough to realize that she had a tea kettle in her hand. Even in the darkness, I could see steam pouring out of the spout. "What are you doing, sweetie?" I asked. My voice projected a confidence and calmness, but I was really trying hard to maintain my bladder control. She tilted her head then, but her expression remained unchanged. "I boiled water," she said. "Want some tea?" I was sure she could hear my heart from where she was standing. I told her no more loudly than I intended. She sort of laughed then and shook her head. It wasn't her laugh though. Her laugh was light and sweet and airy. This laugh was deep, hoarse. It had a harshness to it, like an old woman who had smoked since she was a teenager. That's when she reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a tea bag. She plopped it in her mouth. Before I could stop her, she raised the kettle and began pouring the steaming water down her throat. I screamed out from a place deep in my soul. I leapt up and snatched it out of her hand, getting ugly burns on my own arms and chest in the process. Fuck, I don't know if I said it in my head or out loud. I fumbled in the dark for a phone. All I could think about was that I had to call an ambulance. I was sure she'd melted the lining of her neck. That's when my wife got off the bed and turned on the light. I didn't look at her, I couldn't. I almost expected to see her face half melted. My hands shook from pain and fear as I struggled to punch 911 into the house phone. "Honey," she said, "it's all right. Look at me. It's okay." Her voice sounded normal. I inhaled and then looked at where she was standing. Her face was wet and dripping, as was the rest of her as the result of our little wrestling match over the kettle. Other than that, she looked fine. Normal. I looked across the room to where the tea kettle was lying on the hardwood floor. I walked to it and touched it and saw that even though most of the water was gone now, there was still a bit of steam emanating from it. It was still stinging hot. I looked down at my own hand. It looked raw and was starting to blister from where the water had burned me. My wife calmly picked up the kettle and walked downstairs. When she returned, she had several towels, a mop, and a first aid kit. By morning, everything was dry, my hand had been bandaged. It was almost as if nothing had happened. Incredibly, my daughter slept through this entire incident. I should have left that night, or the next day, but I just kept hoping that things would return to normal. I loved my wife and figured we'd get through this. That it was just some mild postpartum or something. It would ease up in a few months. Of course I was wrong. I have never been more wrong about anything, but I can't go back and change it now. About a week or so after the incident with the tea kettle, my wife had woken before 4 in the morning to nurse our daughter. Usually I would stay in bed, but this time, after a few minutes, I decided to go to the nursery. The curtains were open and the light from the stars gave the room a dreamy appearance. After my wife finished nursing, she fixed her nightgown and smiled down at our baby. From where I stood, I grinned foolishly as well. My wife still didn't notice me standing in the doorway. She was completely fixated on our daughter. I didn't say anything because I knew this was bonding time for them. I didn't want to interrupt. My wife lifted my daughter a bit to press her own face against the small, pudgy cheek. It was beautiful, I thought. I had never seen anything more perfect. That's when my wife, my love, my angel, the woman I chose to share my life with, the woman I chose to have my child, lifted her head slightly, bared her teeth, and sank them into my baby's face. I still hear my daughter's screams when I close my eyes at night. There are some sounds that stay with you, permeating your thoughts and invading the clean, quiet spaces of your psyche. She didn't just bite her either. She latched on and shook like a rabid dog. Her mouth foamed and her blue eyes rolled back in her head so that only the whites showed. I blacked out, I think. My body acted, but my mind had left the scene. The next thing I knew, I was holding my baby whose face was sticky with blood and tears. My wife was on the floor of the nursery with a broken neck and a small chunk of our daughter's face hanging out of her mouth. I was originally charged with second-degree murder. The prosecutor dropped it to manslaughter after my attorney threatened to parade photos of my daughter's face in front of the jury. After some further negotiation, it was agreed that I wouldn't do any jail time. Instead, I would spend a few years in a facility where I could get some help. At first, I was in the highly restricted ward, but the docs soon figured out that I wasn't really a danger to anybody, so they moved me to a facility where I had a lot more freedom. I kinda like it here. The only downside is that I don't get to see my daughter as much as I want, but my therapist says I'm doing well, so I'm hoping to be out soon. My progress reports have been so good that now I'm in Class A, which basically means I just have more privileges, including internet access for 15 minutes a day. Still, I can't leave her, which means I'm stuck missing my baby girl. I can't wait to see her again. It will be hard to look at that scar on her face. She'll have it forever, probably. But she's alive. She's safe. I had taken solace in that fact until a few days ago when I received a letter through the mail center. Well, I thought it was a letter. Turns out it was just a blank piece of paper folded around a photo of my daughter lying in her crib. Tears burned in my eyes as I remembered the way the crib looked in our old nursery.
My wife and I had spent months perfecting it, choosing the sky blue wallpaper, the pink throw rugs, the wooden rocking chair. The crib simply didn't look the same in my sister's plainly designed guest bedroom, but it didn't matter. It was kind that my sister would think to send me a photograph. That's when I looked at the envelope again and realized there was no return address. I didn't even know you could send mail without that. Maybe my sister had used one of those stickers with her address printed on it and it had fallen off somehow. Or maybe the staff had removed it or switched the envelope, but why would they do that? At this point, I looked more closely at the photo. I don't know how I didn't notice it before. Wrapped around one of the white wooden bars of the crib, I saw olive-colored fingers with long red nails. I think I may have hyperventilated or something. Perhaps I passed out. When I woke up, a nurse was offering me water and asked if I was feeling dizzy. That's when I decided to write my story. This isn't an exercise in creative fiction, and this isn't some sort of cathartic, soul-bearing confession meant to ease my conscience. This is a warning. My wife is rotting in the ground, but I'll be damned if I lose my baby too. I don't know what you want. I don't know if you're a witch or a demon or the devil incarnate. But I do know that I'll be out of here soon, and I guarantee you that I am more deadly than any ghost or ghoul you've ever encountered. Stay the fuck away from my daughter.